Kline. Good to see you this morning. Today we're going to talk about insurance right after this quick introduction. So looking forward to it. There you go. Have to have a message from our sponsor, Better Vantage Point. So you've heard me talk before that running a dealership is like trying to tuck an octopus into bed and the tentacles keep flopping out all over everywhere. That's what the sign over my shoulder, that shoulder, is tuck the octopus. A couple of you asked me about that. So today I just want to spend a few minutes, not a long broadcast today, but a few minutes talking about dealers' physical damage insurance and other insurance. I've had a lot of questions this week, and so that's what makes me want to go over this. I got a call, for example, from a dealer in Illinois. The dealer in Illinois had a problem where he had sent a title to a customer who was supposed to then record a lien, and he did not. The customer didn't record the lien, so in essence, the customer stole the vehicle and he won't return the lien. So I'm waiting to to read that insurance policy because there's potentially a claim on two different sections. There's potentially a claim on the crime policy, although I don't think so, but more likely what's called title errors and omissions. Title errors and omissions, which is part of your garage policy. But I want to see the specific language because I might be able to save this dealer close to 40 grand just on this one problem. So again, when you have problems, call me, and I'm glad to talk about them at no charge and be happy to look at it because I want to help. So that was one problem. Next problem is I had a dealer who didn't have any flood coverage on his buildings. So that means if there's rising water. Now, rising water, people say, well, I don't have any rivers or streams around me, and so rising water isn't a problem. Well, that's not always the issue here. So when you have storm grates, and let's go back to what happened in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, there was a river that rose 8 feet in 10 hours. I'll say that again because it's hard to believe. The river rose 8 feet in 10 hours, which is incredible. One part got 7 inches of rain in 45 minutes. And I want to say that again because that's hard to believe. 7 inches of rain in 45 minutes. So when you have these kinds of events, what happens is the stormwater grates, the pump stations can't keep up to move the water along. And so sometimes these grates back up. And when the grates back up, often it can back up into the showroom. And so when you are considering what insurance to buy, it's not just whether you're in a 100-year floodplain or you're not in a 100-year floodplain. Consider what happens if you have one of these weather events where you get this incredible amount of water. What's going to happen to the water? Where will the water go? So one of my clients and I walked around his whole facility. We saw where the knolls or the little hills were, where the buildings were on, looked at the retention ponds to try to determine whether flood coverage was ultimately necessary. And of course, it's always the dealer's call as to whether that is the case. My concern when you're talking about a flood is that the drywall, if water comes in 12 inches into the building, into the whole building, all the drywall has to be replaced up to that 12 inches, right? And so that gets expensive. Flood coverage is not particularly expensive for buildings. There's part of the National Flood Insurance Program, and that's a government-sponsored program. And so, generally speaking, I've seen quotes from anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 for $500,000 on the building and $500,000 on the contents. But see your insurance professional if you want to get a quote, or feel free to call me. I'll help you find somebody to get a quote to talk about that. So those are a couple examples from this week. Also from this week, let's talk about auto dealers' physical damage coverage. Some people call that ADPD coverage. Some people just call it physical damage coverage. So this is the coverage that covers your vehicles if they're in a flood, to talk about that, or any other weather event. So first, when you're choosing an insurance company, consider what's called their AM Best rating. AM as in automatic, I guess. AM Best. And AM Best rating is like the financial health of the insurance company. And you want to get a AM Best rating of somewhere between A minus, A, or A plus, or A plus plus. Anything in the B range, I think, is probably not satisfactory from a risk perspective that you would want to risk insuring for fear that that insurance company might not be able to pay multiple claims over multiple places. So check the AM Best ratings on all your insurance programs. That's always a good thing to do. The next thing we're talking about when you talk about the auto dealer's physical damage coverage is you want to look at 4 or 5 different things. Of course, it's very complicated. There's lots of different items, but let's start with a false pretense coverage. I had a dealer from Texas call me. He had wired money to 3 different individuals on 3 different cars, and all of those individuals didn't show up at the cars and didn't give the dealer the title. So the first mistake there, of course, is don't wire monies to people that you haven't seen or you don't know, which sounds pretty obvious, but this particular dealer lost $160,000 on this. So, and when you lost the $160,000, I asked to see the insurance policy. He had no false pretense coverage. So false pretense coverage would cover when the dealership gets taken advantage of through any false pretense or trick. It's also called trick or device coverage. So dealers are really need to have this coverage, and you'll need to check your physical damage coverage to make sure you have that. Most policies come with 250,000. Some come with only 100,000, and you have to think about whatever kind of cars you sell. Would that $100,000 be enough to cover a loss? Because as everybody knows, with inflation and the cost of things going up, sometimes $100,000 won't cover the cost of some of the cars that we're selling now. So find out what the limits are, whether that's a one-time thing, whether you can have like one car at 100,000 and then you're done for the year, or whether there's an aggregate where you could have 2 cars at 100,000 for a $200,000 aggregate. So that's the first thing to check. Of course, you want to know your deductible on a false pretense coverage as well. And then let's talk about weather and flood deductibles and aggregates. So a weather deductible, of course, is if you have, it's per car. So it's $1,000 per car, or $2,500 per car, or $5,000 per car. And I often get asked also, why would I get a higher or lower deductible? And that's a balancing act, because you're going to get a reduced premium, more skin in the game that you take on. And so take a look at $1,000, $2,500, and $5,000 deductibles. Sometimes it's worth the premium savings to look at that. Sometimes it's not. Just depends on your situation. But on a weather claim or flood claim, really, we're talking about the same thing when you talk about an aggregate. I want to make sure everyone understands, because aggregates can cost a lot of money for a dealership. So if you don't have an aggregate and you have $1,000 per car and you have 200 cars, that's $2 million, right? If you have $1,000, let me make sure I'm doing my math right, because it's still early in the morning. But if you have $1,000 times 200 cars, excuse me, that's 200,000. Too many, I gave you too many zeros. It's $200,000. So if you have $1,000 deductible and you have to repair 200 cars, that's $200,000. Sorry about that mistake. $200,000 that you have to pay. But if you had an aggregate of a 100,000, that when you reach that limit of 100,000, that's all you'd have to pay for that many claims. Now, those aggregates can be negotiated. I just negotiated a dealer's aggregate down from 100,000 down to 25,000, which was really a big win on that for a weather aggregate. So that means if he has damage resulting from any weather event, then the maximum he's going to pay per occurrence is 25,000, which brings up probably my last point for today, which is per occurrence versus per location. So let's say you have a $25,000 aggregate that's per occurrence. Per occurrence, even if you have 3 locations and you have 1 event, then you pay 25,000 maximum. But if it's per location, and you have 3 locations, then that's $75,000 that you'll be responsible for. So these numbers are super important. It's really beneficial for you to take a deep dive on these insurance items, all of the items. It takes time and it takes patience, of course. I'm glad to answer any questions, so feel free to call me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I think that's all for today. I'm Tom Kline, and thanks again for seeing things from a better vantage point. Have a great day.